My name is Marissa Cole. I'm 31 years old. 11 days before my wedding, my parents invited my fiancé to what they called a family blessing dinner. By the time the coffee was served, my father pushed his chair back, folded his napkin carefully on the table, and said, "Before you marry her, you need to understand what kind of woman she is." My mother didn't blink. "She had a baby at 20, she said calmly. And she signed her away, without looking back. The room went so quiet, I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. Because what they didn't know was that the daughter they claimed I abandoned was already upstairs in the same building, holding a tiny gift bag with purple tissue paper, waiting for her cue. If you're listening tonight, drop where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. This is Midnight Drama Stories. And this is how my parents tried to rewrite my life, and how my daughter rewrote it back. 10 years ago, I was 20 and studying interior design at a small college in Connecticut. I had a part-time job at a fabric store and a boyfriend named Caleb, who built custom motorcycles and swore he'd never live anywhere but the coast. We weren't reckless. We were just young. I found out I was pregnant in early April, sitting cross-legged on the tile floor of my apartment bathroom, staring at two lines that refused to fade. I remember the sound of the shower dripping and the way my reflection didn't look like mine anymore. I told my parents the following Sunday. I thought they would be disappointed. I didn't expect them to mobilize like a crisis management team. My mother called it damage control. My father called it protecting your future. They told me I would regret keeping the baby. They told me Caleb would leave. They told me I would never finish school. And when I said I wanted time to think, my father said, "Thinking is how girls ruin their lives." They moved me back home under the excuse of helping me get through the semester. My phone bill was suddenly being handled by them. Caleb's number stopped coming through. Emails bounced. I later found out my mother had answered his calls and told him I had decided to end things. She told him I was seeing someone else. He tried for weeks, then stopped. I didn't know that until years later. The pregnancy was treated like a stain that needed hiding. I was told not to leave the house during church hours. I wasn't allowed to post photos. My mother found an attorney through a friend at her country club. "Private adoption," she said. "No paperwork that follows you around forever." I kept saying I wasn't sure. My father kept saying, "You'll thank us." The day my daughter was born, it rained. I remember because the hospital windows blurred into silver streaks. Labor was long. I kept asking for Caleb, knowing he wasn't coming because he didn't know. When she finally arrived, she was loud and fierce and perfect. A shock of black hair and a birthmark just above her collarbone shaped like a small star. I held her against my chest and felt something settle inside me that had never been there before. I said, "Her name is Noel." My mother said, "Don't make this harder." They let me hold her for 2 minutes. Maybe less. I memorized her cry, the warmth of her cheek against mine. I whispered, "I will find you someday." My father signed the adoption papers before I had finished reading them. Closed adoption. No identifying information. "It's cleaner," he said. For everyone. When I woke up the next morning, the bassinet was empty. For years, I told myself I had chosen that path. It was easier than admitting I had been cornered. I transferred schools, finished my degree, built a portfolio, started designing small retail spaces. I dated, but never deeply. Every December 12th, her birthday, I stayed home, lit a single candle, and wrote her a letter I never sent. I kept them in a wooden box under my bed. 10 letters. 10 apologies. 10 versions of "I hope you're happy." 3 years ago, I met Owen at a gallery opening. He was patient and steady and asked questions without prying. When I told him about the adoption, he didn't flinch. "That must have felt like losing a limb," he said quietly. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. When he proposed last winter at a lighthouse overlooking the water, I said yes because for the first time my life felt like something I had built myself. 6 months before the wedding, Owen did something I didn't know about. He ordered a DNA kit. Not because he doubted me. Because he wanted to know if there was a chance. "Closed adoption doesn't mean invisible," he told me later. The results came back with nothing at first. Then, 3 months later, a new match appeared.
Close family.
Female. 9 years old. Rhode Island. He didn't tell me immediately. He hired a consultant who specialized in reunions. He needed to be sure before he reopened a wound I had spent a decade stitching closed. The consultant found her through public records and a parent-managed account linked to the DNA match. Her name is Noel Harper. She lives in Providence with 2 teachers who adopted her as an infant. They were told, I wanted no contact. I never said that. Someone had. Owen showed me her school photo on a quiet Tuesday evening. She had the same dark hair, the same stubborn tilt of her chin, the star-shaped birthmark visible at the edge of her collar. I felt like the floor had dissolved under me. We found her, he said softly. I couldn't breathe. Through an attorney, we reached out to her adoptive parents. They were cautious but kind. They had always planned to help Noel find me one day. They assumed I had chosen distance. We met in a public park near their house. Noel wore a yellow hoodie and carried a sketchbook. She studied me with narrowed eyes, then asked, Did you want me? I swallowed. Yes, I said. I wanted you every day. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away for later. We started visits.
Short.
Supervised. Gradual. Noel asked if she could come to the rehearsal dinner. I want to see what a wedding looks like, she said. We hesitated, then agreed. We didn't tell my parents. We thought we could handle them after the honeymoon. We underestimated them. A week before the rehearsal dinner, my mother somehow found out. A mutual acquaintance saw Owen and Noel at a bookstore and mentioned it. My mother did the rest. Phone calls. Digging. She showed up at our apartment unannounced and demanded to know why I was dragging up the past. When I told her we had reconnected, she said, You're destabilizing that child's life for your own guilt. I said, You destabilized mine. 2 days later came the blessing dinner. It wasn't just immediate family. There were aunts, cousins, 2 of my parents' longtime friends. My father waited until dessert to speak. Owen deserves the truth, he said. Marissa had a baby and walked away. Owen set his fork down carefully. I'm aware she had a daughter, he said. My mother blinked. And you're still here? I'm more than here, he replied. I'm involved. My father scoffed. She signed her away. That's abandonment. Owen pulled out his phone. We have records showing requests for updates were denied by someone claiming to represent Marissa. That wasn't her. My mother's face went pale. You don't understand the full story. No, Owen said calmly. I do. Then he looked toward the staircase. Noel walked down slowly, holding a small gift bag. She wore a navy dress and scuffed white sneakers. The room froze. She stopped beside me and looked at the table.
Hi, she said.
I'm Noel. Someone whispered. Oh my God. Noel continued. I'm Marissa's daughter. And I have 2 families. My mother stood abruptly. This is inappropriate. Noel tilted her head. Are you my grandma? She asked. My mother hesitated. Noel went on. Mom, Marissa told me her parents thought I would ruin her life. Is that true? Silence. Not one person defended my parents. My aunt looked down at her plate. My father's friend cleared his throat uncomfortably. Owen's sister stood and said, I think we've heard enough. My father tried to speak, but the room had shifted. The narrative they'd carried for 10 years cracked open in front of witnesses. My mother grabbed her purse. You'll regret this, she said to me. No, I replied. I won't. They left before the check arrived. The next evening, Noel stood beside me at the rehearsal dinner instead of hiding upstairs. When my maid of honor gave her speech, she mentioned second chances. Noel squeezed my hand under the table. I'm glad you found me, she whispered. The wedding day was clear and bright. Noel walked ahead of me down the aisle carrying a small bouquet of white peonies. Owen cried when he saw us both. During our vows, he said, we choose honesty over fear. I believed him. A week after the wedding, I sent my parents a formal letter. No contact. No involvement. Not with me. Not with Noel. You chose reputation over relationship, I wrote. I'm choosing differently. They never responded. Noel spends every other weekend with us now. She still calls her adoptive parents mom and dad. She calls me Mom Mari. 4 parents. 1 girl. No secrets. On December 12th this year, instead of lighting a candle alone, I baked a cake with her and let her lick the frosting from the spoon. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing my parents publicly. I don't. They tried to weaponize my worst memory. Instead, it became the night my daughter stood beside me and said my name without anger. If you've ever had someone try to rewrite your story, type, "I'm free" in the comments. This is Midnight Drama Stories. And sometimes the truth doesn't whisper. Sometimes she walks down the stairs and introduces herself.